Hello everyone, welcome to the Declarative Cassie YouTube channel. Today you will learn about implementing social sign-in for your Flutter applications by using AWS Amplify authentication libraries. By the end of the video, you will be able to implement Amazon sign-in, Apple sign-in, Google sign-in, and Facebook login for your iOS, Android, web, and desktop applications. If you're ready, let's get started. For starting off, you need to open either your IDE or terminal to create a new project. I decided to use IntelliJ IDEA for the sake of it being simple to create a Flutter project, but you can again use any other IDEs like VS Code or terminal directly to create your own project. In IntelliJ IDEA, click on New Project, and once you click on it, select the Flutter as a category and click on Next. You will see the project name. I will call this Social Sign in. You can add a description as well, or you can change the organization. I will call this dev.sali, which is the domain that I have. And you can pick the platforms that you support. Once you pick these, you can click on Create and wait for your project to be created. After a couple of seconds, it will already create the project for you. Now you will be able to run the project on iOS, Android, desktop, or web. Let's start off by trying the project on web. Now we are running. There we go. See, now it is open. You can click on the buttons, and now we will use this project to move forward and learn about social sign-in. First thing that I would like to do now is to get rid of all of these counter application stuff and use an actual application UI. I don't want to implement a UI for authentication. I don't want to implement a whole new structure for it. And thanks to the library that we have from Amplify UI, which is called Authenticator, we are able to have a fully designed, fully implemented sign-in flows for our applications. With the developer preview that is released recently, you are able to have desktop, web, and mobile applications that is supporting Authenticator UI. Using that is quite straightforward. You will go to the pub.dev, check out the latest pre-release version, copy that, go back to your pubspec.yaml file, and paste it under dependencies. Once you add that, it will say that, okay, now there's a library. But Authenticator library itself is not enough. You should have some helpful libraries to be able to have authentication flows working properly. One thing is Amplify Flutter library. This library will help you to configure Amplify libraries for your Flutter applications. Another one is Amplify Auth Cognito. This is the original sign-in, sign-up libraries that we use for Amplify authentication. This is also used in the Cognito user pool to have a proper flow for your users in your application. Let's copy that as well. Now that we copied these three libraries, I would like to mention one thing. You can see that each of these are used in a specific naming, which is 1.0.0-next.0, and at the end we have +1. This +1 comes from semantic versioning, and Flutter's pub-get command is smart enough to get the latest patch. So for being more readable, you can get rid of the latest versions of these, and it will still get the latest version without hurting anything in the application. Once you have the libraries, let's click on pub-get. Once the libraries are installed, now you are able to actually use them within your application. So as a next step, we are going to initialize the Amplify libraries for our project and use them later on. First things first, let's open up our terminal, and I will just go to the path of my project. Now let's write Amplify init. This command is helping us to initialize the Amplify libraries. This way we can call Amplify add and any other libraries to our project, and configuration will be handled automatically. So it will ask us, what name do you want for your project? And you can keep the default one, which is the social sign-in in our case. It will give us a default configuration and ask us if it's okay. You can say no, but I will say yes because everything looks good. I don't want to change the environment, I don't want to change the name, and I don't want to change the app type because it already understood that it is a Flutter application. And now you can either pick the AWS profile that you have, or you can have an AWS access key and share it with your peers. For my case, I'm a sole developer and I am actually implementing this by myself, so I will pick AWS profile. Once I pick this one, it will ask me which profile do I want to have, and I will say default. And once it is done, it will make some adjustments and create a project in the cloud for you. Once the project is initialized, you will see a couple of messages like you can see the status of your application, you can actually add any library like API by using the add command, and it will also say that all your environments and provider initialized successfully. If you have this message, you're doing good so far. The next step that we are going to do is actually to add the library for authentication. We will do a couple of things that are really important here, so please watch it carefully. I will clean up the terminal right now, and I will write amplify add auth. After I wrote this one, it will tell me, okay, what do you want to have? Do you want to have default configuration? Do you want to have default configuration with social provider? Tell me what you want. You can pick anything out of this list. And for our example, we will be using the social provider. And once you pick the social provider, it will ask you, okay, you need to pick a default way of having and sign in. You can pick anything again. I'm going to pick username because it is the most straightforward one. And it's going to ask, hey, do you want to have anything that you want to configure in an advanced level? We will say no to this. And first thing that comes is, what domain name prefix do you want to use? You can go with the default one because it needs to be a unique one. After you pick this one, it will ask you to create a redirect sign-in URI. So for this purpose, we need to go to the OAuth documentation. There are redirect URLs for your native applications. You can implement a custom protocol for your application and handle it on any native or cross-platform application like iOS, Android. In our case, we will go with my app, but again, like it can be a custom schema, so you can pick anything that you find useful. So let's go back to our application and say my app and go with the custom schema that has been exampled in the OAuth website. Why do we care that if it's OAuth? Because behind the scenes, the social sign-in is using OAuth as well. So that is why we will be following the lead out of it. So I picked this sign-in URI for me. It will ask me if I want to have another sign-in URI. Normally, you don't have to say yes to this, but we will say yes because we want to be able to test this locally for our web servers as well. So I will just say http://localhost and any port that you find useful. I will say 3000 and put a slash to the end of it. It will say, okay, do you want to add anything else? We will say no now. And it will ask us about, do you want to have a sign out URI? We will do the same thing that we did for sign in. We will say yes and say http://localhost 3000 / and we are good to go now. Now it will ask us to pick a social provider for our application. I will choose Amazon because in the alphabetical order, Amazon comes first, then Apple comes, then Facebook, and lastly, we will see Google. So I picked Amazon now, and I will say, okay, let's do it. Now it will ask me about an app ID for my OAuth flow. For using this, we need to go back to the Amazon's Developer Center. So let's open the browser and write Amazon Developer Center. And it will take us to the developer.amazon.com. And once we are here, we can go to the developer console, and if you're not signed in, we can sign in. Once you sign in, you will go to the dashboard of your developer account for Amazon. You need to go to the login with Amazon, and after you click on that, it will ask you to create a new security profile. Let's click on this button here to create a security profile. It will ask us the name of the profile. We can name it with the app name that we have and say social sign in video. And we can say that social sign in video. If you have a privacy notice, which you should have in your real application, you should put that here. I will just write example.com privacy HTML, but seriously, you need to pick a proper privacy notice here, especially if you are in a GDPR compliant country. You can pick the consent logo image, which should be the logo that you have for your application, and say save. Once it is saved, it will show you a client ID and client secret to be used for your application. So you need to click on this to be able to show your client ID and client secret. Copy the client ID and go back to your terminal and paste that client ID. And after that, it will ask you about the secret. Copy the secret, go back to your application, and enter again. For making this work, you need to say amplify push. The reason that we do this right now is after you created this sign-in, it will give you a redirect URL that you're going to be using to redirect your application. It will upload the files and it will take some minutes, by the way, so if it takes longer, do not worry, everything is all right. Say yes to this, and after it is done, you will be able to have the next step for your application. Let's wait a couple of minutes and I will be back with you in a second. Now that this operation ended, you have this hosted UI endpoint, and if you want to test it, you have the test endpoint as well. So let's copy this one because this is the one that we are going to be using for our redirect operations. And go back to the developer console. Go to the web settings here, and you will see allowed origins and allowed return URLs. Let's go back and paste the URL that you copied before to the allowed origins, and to the allowed return URLs, go back and write auth2/idp response. Okay, and once you save this one, all you need to do for Amazon sign-in is finished. Now let's go back and actually implement the UI for our application. Let's go to the documentation of Authenticator. Go back a bit down, and you can see that there's a really easy way to implement all of these UI into our application. Let's copy this and paste it to our main.dart file. Once you paste this one, you will not be seeing any warnings or errors, but let's do a bit of cleanup to make some changes. First things first, we have to configure Amplify here, which is a feature, but we do not have a mechanism to control that if it is actually finished or not. So let's actually remove this one, get rid of this one as well, and make this a stateless widget. Stateless widget. And it will ask us to create a constructor. Let's create that as well. Once it is done, paste the method that you copied earlier to the higher level place. Once you implement that one, let's make this also return future, so we are more verbose now. Let's call this in our main function and be sure that it is working properly. So here we are saying configure amplify. And how do we be sure that it is actually finished before we run the application? By changing this to a feature and making this asynchronous and saying that, okay, wait for this to be finished. But there's one caveat here that we need to be careful about. The Amplify libraries will rely on the fact that the widgets binding is there. But widgets binding is actually called inside the run app. So since we want this to be ready, what we are going to do is we will just say that just create and be sure that widgets binding is already there. Once it is there, it will be able to actually run the application properly. So now that we have everything in place, let's go and check out our build function here. On the higher level, we have our Authenticator, which is the orchestrator for our authentication operations that we have seen before. The material app is the one that we already know. It is a material component holder app that we use in our Flutter applications. And inside the material app, we have the Authenticator builder, which is keeping the information about sign in, sign up, confirmation pages, and many more, and doing the building of these UI components. And lastly, we have the home, which is the place that we call after the sign-in operation happens. Right now, it only says you're logged in. I want to change something here. I want to remove this widget and wrap this with column and say that, okay, if I am logged in, I would like to be able to sign out as well. So this sign out button also comes from Authenticator library. It doesn't do anything than just call sign out, but once the sign out is called, Authenticator builder is smart enough to take us back to the sign in. Right now these will be crammed a bit. I will just put a padding here and just let it as it is. Now that everything is ready, let's run the application on web. Now the browser has opened our Flutter web application. You can see that we are on the localhost 58595 port, and you can see that I'm clicking on this one. But you might be realizing nothing happens. What's going on, and how can we fix this problem if there's even any problem? Let's go back to our logs, and you can see that it says, okay, this base URL is not registered. So we don't know what's going on, but you need to be sure that this is registered, and it takes us to a place for documentation. If we go to the documentation, we can actually see that it will tell us to add a redirect sign for the localhost 3000, like we did. So what's the problem here? The problem is that we are on a different port, which means that our redirect sign-in URIs are not smart enough to understand what's going on here. So for fixing this, we can go to the configurations, the new Flutter one, and say that, okay, let's call this web 3000 and add an additional argument, because if you go a bit down, it will say that, okay, you need to have web port 3000 or any other port that you decided for your URI to be added here for testing locally. Apply that and rerun the application again. There we go. Now we have the application on 3000, and let's click on the URL if it's going to work or not. We're clicking on this, and bam, it took us to Amazon sign-in. But let's not get excited yet. Let's see if it's going to work. I will be adding my username here. I'm signed in now, and it will ask for a verification number. I will be waiting for that message, and now I have that, and I sign in again, and it will say that, okay, it will ask to reach out to your name and email address. I will allow it, and once it is allowed, you can see that we are able to actually log in. Yeah, so first step of the login is done. Now we're able to actually log in with Amazon sign in. Next step is sign in with Apple. This might be a bit tricky, but don't worry, we will go through each step together, and I will show you any possible problems as well if it might occur. So for this purpose, go to developer.apple.com and click on your account. If you don't have it already, just create one. It's 99 euros per year, and if you want to have any iOS or macOS applications, you need to have one anyway. Once you're in the dashboard, you can see certificates, IDs, and profiles on the either left pane or in the center. You can click either of them and open up the page with identifiers, keys, and like services that you might be using. Go back to the identifiers and register an app ID. This app ID will be used to use Apple services. And you might be adding a description like social sign-in YouTube video, and you might add a bundle. If you want to see what your bundle ID is, go back to your project and look for project bundle identifier. Your project bundle identifier is actually hidden under this key. You can copy this one, go back and select it here, remove any spaces at the end or beginning, and go back to below and actually select sign in with Apple as well, because you want to use this service with this app. Once you have everything, take a note of this team ID here. This is really important. You will be adding this or using this later on for your Amplify initialization. Click on continue and say register. First step is done. The second step is creating a services ID. Click on continue here, select a description, and add an identifier, which is the previous identifier can be used with adding an SID suffix here. Once you continue and register it, you're good to go with this as well. So now we have the app ID, we know our team IDs and everything. So let's click on the services IDs again, because in this page you will be actually enabling the sign in with Apple. For sign in with Apple to be enabled, you need to configure that. First, we are being sure that it is configured for our application. And second, we will have domains and subdomains that we are going to be using for this sign in with Apple. In the previous implementation with Amazon, we had the URLs already defined. You can either get those URLs from the console, or you can actually go ahead and check out it from the Amazon developer portal and copy and paste them here as well. The information to keep in mind is that these URLs are used in between all the social providers, so you don't need to change anything along the way. So I will just go ahead and copy the return URL from the Amazon developer portal and paste this here, and go back and select the origin as well and put it here. Once you click on next, it will say whoa, like this is not valid. The reason that it is not valid is that it will definitely ask you to have HTTPS, and it doesn't even allow you to have this prefix for your domain. So you need to remove that one and click on next. Now you can see that everything is working. Just say done. Once you're done, click on continue, and once you continue, you can just save it. Once this is saved, your sign in with Apple is ready as well. For moving forward, what you need to do next is creating a key. This key is important to have a connection between your application and services ID. So click on sign in with Apple. It will say, okay, you need to configure this one. Select the app ID that we have created before, save it, name the key YouTube video key, and continue. It will say that, okay, do you want to register it? Let's do it. So it will give you a key ID here, and it will ask you to download the key. I'm not going to close this page because we will need this key ID later on. What you need to do now is to add this information to your application. So go to the terminal and write amplify update auth. Once you updated the authentication, you can go through the options, but what we need is update auth social providers and enable the sign in with Apple. You can keep the previous auth IDs for your Amazon. You don't need to change these. It will ask about, okay, what is your services ID? And you might be saying it is dev.sali.socialsignin.sid. This is the first one. The second one is team ID. The team ID is either on the top right or you already copied it like I said earlier. And your key ID, the key ID is the one that we have over here, like that's why we didn't close this page, right? And lastly, it will ask about the private key. For having the private key, you can either download it like you had here and open it up on your like text editor or browser. You just paste the private key as well and you are good to go. Now what you need to do is you need to do an amplify push, and this will actually have all of these changes on the cloud. So it will tell, okay, something has changed here. Do you want to update? You will say yes. Then I will see you in 1 second. But take your time, go ahead, get a coffee, and I will meet you later. Now that everything is pushed successfully, you can see the hosted UI endpoints again. Nothing has changed, so you don't need to worry about anything. What we need to do now is we would like to be sure that this is working also on our application. So what are we going to do? We are going to run this as a macOS application. For running this as a macOS application, we need to do one setting. Go to the Xcode and actually open the project file macOS with the Xcode. This way you are going to be changing something in your project. We'll say open project, desktop, development projects, social sign-in, and macOS. Once we open that up, we are going to add the app sandbox capabilities and enable the incoming server messages. So how are we going to do that? So first let's go to the sign-in capabilities, and you can see we have the app sandbox already. You can see incoming connections is already there. We will select on outgoing connections too. So when it is done, let's go back to our application and click on macOS and say, okay, let's run this. Now that the app is running, you can see that something is going on here. It says, could not access the items in the keychain due to a missing entitlement. Recovery suggestion: if you're not explicitly disabled to use data protection, this may be a result of your application. So let's see what the problem might be here. Okay, this seems like it is saying you don't have the proper entitlement. And let's go back to our Xcode, and we might not be seeing that we don't have the capability of keychain sharing, and authentication for Amplify is actually using keychain sharing for keeping the authentication information. So let's go and select the keychain sharing, add this to our application, and let's run this again. It says, okay, another error, but that's not a problem. It says enable development signing. That's completely fine. Let's go back and enable the development signing. It is going to repair it for us. It says dev.solid.social signing is not unique. Let's change this to YouTube then and try again and make it repair. Okay, now it is actually signing this. So let's try to run it. Okay, now we have the sign in with Apple. Let's try to use it. We have the sign in with Apple. Let's do log in with this. It will say, okay, we have the two-factor authentication. Let's allow it. You can trust this. And you can either share your email or not. I will share it because this is my application. And it's working. So it is working properly. That's good. So you can see that by adding the keychain, we were actually able to have the application running for us. You can sign out again. You can go back. Let's try the Amazon one. Maybe it will work, maybe it won't. We will see it together. So let me add my password. Now I'm signed in, and it will say that, okay, if you want to allow, let's allow it. And once you allow it, it will say you are signed in, and you can see that we are signed in. So now we have Apple sign in and Amazon sign in working for us. The next one is Facebook sign in. So I will see you with the Facebook sign in a second. I know this was a really tricky one, but we were able to pass the obstacles together. So kudos to everyone who is like coming this far. So now that we have the Apple sign in, The next step is Facebook sign-in. For the Facebook sign-in, what we need to do is first get rid of all of these sign-in pages that we have and say that, okay, let's go to the Meta for developers, which is the Facebook's developer portal. For working with Facebook applications, you need to have a Facebook account. If you don't have it, just go ahead and create one. Once you're there, you can click on My Apps, and you can have like several different apps if you want to. You can have the Instagram login and many more. What we are going to create is an application for Facebook login. So first we will create the app. All right, so we will create the application. It will ask you about your Facebook password. Now we have the Facebook login. Let's go to the settings and create a basic settings for our application. And for this purpose, once you just click on basic, you will have the app ID and your secret working for you. What you need to do is go back to your terminal and write amplify update auth, because now we are going to be adding Facebook to our provider. Click on Facebook and say, okay, what is your Facebook ID for your OAuth flow? Let's copy this one and paste it here. It will ask about the secret. It will just show it and select that one. And it will say, okay, you have opted to allow users to authenticate via Amazon as well. So you can enter your Amazon credentials from before. You can add your client secret from before. And now it will ask you to have your services ID again. So what you need to do is you need to go to your Apple developer account, the team ID. You might remember to save it from before. It will ask you about the key ID. The key ID was from the creation of it. And after you have the key ID, you need to have the private key. And let's have that private key here. And copy that one and put this here as well. And now you have the Facebook login. Let's push these changes and wait for a couple of minutes to have all of these changes on the cloud as well. Well, that was quick. And now we have the hosted UI endpoint. So let's copy this one to be on the safe side. You can also copy it from the console as well, like it's not so different, and go back to the console. And first thing is you're going to add the URL to the app domains here. And the second thing that you're going to do is add in a platform and call it website. And what you're going to do is add OAuth 2 and add in it IDP response and save the changes. Once the changes are saved, go to the Facebook login here, and you can see that all of these are already prepared for you, and you will be adding the OAuth 2 IDP response here and saving the changes. And once it is saved, you can go back to your application and run it on, this time let's run it on iOS Simulator and have Facebook login in iOS Simulator for us. So let's run the app. Once we run the application, we will see an error, and this error is completely fine, by the way, because, just give me a second, the minimum version of the iOS that is supported for the Amplify libraries is 13, and if you don't change it on the pod file, it will come as 9. So go to the iOS now, go to the pod file and change this to 13 and run this again. Okay, now the app is running and you can see that we have a new fancy button, which is sign in with Facebook. Let's click on that one and you can see that you have a nice UI. So let's have the login information for us. Okay, it says like it wants access to your profile, which is what we expected. We can say continue as Sally, and it is doing the login, and we are logged in, so it is working as well. That is good news. And I want to try out something because this one went smoother than I would expect it to be. I will try to run this on actually macOS and see how it behaves. Let's run it. Okay, now the app is running, which is really cool. Now you have the button and it says you are signed in because we are already signed in another tab. And if you go back to the app, it says you're good. You can go back and see that your application is working properly with sign in with Facebook as well. So cool. Next step is, and that is actually the final step, Google sign in. This is going to be a nice one as well because it will work on Android this time. For the Google sign in, we need to go to the Google Cloud Console and actually create a new application. So let's write Google Cloud Console and click on the first result. And you can see that there are applications. There's already a set of applications that you can see. And let's create a new project and call that YouTube Social Sign In. And it asks for an organization. We don't need to create one. And let's create a project. Okay, it is created. So let's select the project. It is already here. Once it is created, let's go back and go to the APIs and services and click on credentials. You can see that we don't have any credentials here, but you can see that it says remember to configure auth consent screen with information about your application. So let's configure it by listening to the console actually. And you can choose how you want to configure and register your application. You can just create directly here and you can say YouTube Social Sign In. The support email will be my personal email. You can pick any email as well, or you can dedicate an email for this too. And lastly, the developer contact address, you can give the email here as well. Once you do this, it will create the auth screen for you. You can just save and continue, and go back to the dashboard. So next thing that we are going to do is when you release your application, you have a different version than you have in your testing versions. So if you want to test the login, you need to define the test users. And I will add my email address as the testing user. So later on, when I have my application to be running on Google Sign-In, I will be sure that my email address is actually there. And I will say save, and now it is saved. Perfect. So let's go back to the credentials again and say create credentials and say auth client ID. We will say it's a web application. We have authorized JavaScript origins and we have authorized redirect URIs as well. So what we need to do now is we will say amplify update auth again. Go to the social provider and pick the last option. So we will go to the Facebook app ID, select the app ID again. We will go to the app secret, select the app secret again. We will go web client ID for our application. So where is our web client ID? For that, first we need to create our application, and it will say, okay, this is your web client ID. We copied that and pasted. The secret is here as well. We pasted that too. It will say, okay, you need to have your Amazon application too. Let's do that. We will have the secret as well. Let's do that. we will have the services ID. Let's do that. The team ID again, the key ID, and the private key, like we did before. We will open up our Finder window and downloads and show our key. Copy that key again. We will copy the key and go back to the terminal and paste it. Now each of these platforms are defined. Let's do Amplify push. And this will be the last push that you're going to be doing. I promise you that. So after you do this, you'll say yes and wait a couple of minutes. Okay, now the latest push is done and we have the hosted UI endpoint again. We will use this, so no worries. So let's close this one and go back to our client IDs. So we need to first add the URL that we are going to be using. So this is the one. And we need to have the redirect URL, which is auth to IDP response. And once it is done, we will save it. And after we save it, now we are ready with running the application again. And as you might remember, this time we will run it on Android. So first things first, let's open an Android emulator and close the other ones. Yeah, while the Android emulator is opening, the Amplify libraries are demanding a minimum version of 24 for your Flutter application. So go to the Android, go to the app and build Gradle. And in the build Gradle, you can see that you will have a minimum SDK version that is coming from Flutter itself. Let's change that to 24 to be compliant with Android. The second thing that we need to do is we need to enable the WebView logins for our Android applications. For doing that, we need to change some stuff in our Android manifest file. You need to go to the src main and Android manifest now to add a new intent filter, which is for the web UI sign-in. So in the activity that is inside the main activity, which is the actual activity that is used in Flutter, you will add a new intent filter. You can change the schema in the way that you want it. We said it was my app, so we will carry on with my app. So let's stop this one first. Emulator is running, and let's run this one. Again, it might take a couple of seconds, and we will wait in the meantime that it actually runs it. Okay, now the application is running. Let's try it out. Click on sign in with Google, and now we have an error. It says URL launcher exception. No browser available for launching URL intent. Ensure you have added the queries tag to your Android manifest as outlined in the docs. In the docs, you can see that they have the queries actually. Let's copy that one. And so let's add that one. Restart the application from scratch, because once you change something on the manifest, it will not change like it is hot reloaded. So you need to have an actual reinstallation of the APK. So now we are running. We have the nice Flutter view. Configuration is successful. We are clicking. Okay, see, we have the application now. We will run it. It will say you need a two-step verification. Let's do the verification again. It will do the sign in, and everything is working fine. So now you have the Apple, Amazon, Facebook, and Google sign in for you. So yeah, this is working pretty good right now. You're able to actually have 4 different type of sign in working properly for your application. So that's always really cool. So let's close this up and run the application one last time on Chrome, because I want to see how it works on web. I close the emulator now. Now we are running on Chrome, and after that we will have the final words. Okay, now you can see everything here. You can click on the Google sign in. You can actually do the sign in, accept the two-factor authentication, and once it is done, it will take you back to the application and you are signed in. Yes, and everything else works as well. I know it was a lot to learn, and I know it was a lot to inhale, to be honest, but you did a great job. I'm sure you have questions. I'm sure you had other errors. Please do not hesitate to ask them to me. Also, we have Amplify Discord that I'm going to be leaving the link of. Just come over there, ask the questions, and everyone will be more than happy to help. All in all, I'm sure it was a great journey because social sign-in is a really, really important topic. If you have an app with login, it's a must to have a social sign-in. So go ahead, implement this. Let me know what you think of it. And I'm really glad that you made it this far. I will see you in the next video. Take care.